LSAT last year around the same time. I was prepping for the April exam, but I had also just started 2 new jobs, which I weren't expecting to get, and they kind of just landed in my hand. And I still was prepping for the LSAT. And in hindsight, I probably should have just postponed it to when I was more comfortable with the roles and I could take time off. But I didn't, and I tried to do all of them at once, which was like definitely way too much. So last April, I ended up scoring a 157, which is at least 10 points lower than I'd like to be. Ideally, I'd like to be around, of course, the 170 range. So I'm basically restarting my prep now. I'm only working 1 job and I'm used to my role. And also the job I do is very seasonal because it's with international negotiations. So we have a big negotiation in June and another big one in November. So I know that in April, for example, I'll be able to take off about 2 weeks just to prep for the LSAT. So that's a bit of background on my LSAT history. Regarding my strengths and weaknesses when I was prepping last time, I remember in the beginning, games were tough, but I kind of got used to them. One thing with games, though, is I realized I would often fall for like a trick answer and then get all of the subsequent answers wrong, which of course I know is something that's planned, especially in the later stages of the games. But basically, I'm just reviewing my main mistakes from last year and trying to figure out how I can improve and really just work on my score and get it to where it needs to be. Yeah, so that's a brief overview about me, but I don't know how much detail I should go on into the various areas or.
Sure, that's a great starting point. Thank you for sharing the background. It sounds like you've put in quite a bit of work already, and you also have a good amount of time between now and when you take the LSAT. We're speaking now mid-January. You've got time off in April, as you said. Is there a particular month you're looking to take the LSAT?
So I noticed that there's an LSAT date for April 30th, so towards the end of April. I'm thinking that's probably my best time because there's no exam in May, and the exam in June would be at the same time as I work at the UNFCCC, and we have these big negotiations every June and November. They're called like COPs, and then the subsidiary body of the COPs. But basically, during those times, I cannot take off work. Like it's a very strict, hard and fast rule. But in April, generally, you can take off around 2 weeks during Easter, which kind of falls during the same time. So ideally, if I take the April 30th exam, that would be ideal. I'm planning on applying to law school this September, right when applications open, to apply a year in advance to maximize my scholarship options and things like that. So that's my general plan. So it would be the April 2022 LSAT towards the end of the month. If I had to retake it again, I could do the July one, but I think just in terms of time off and things, the April one would be ideal.
Sure. We can definitely orient you around April. Now, in terms of sections or question types, you notice any particular weak areas?
Yeah, so I noticed like I said, in my studying last time, the games, as I guess everyone who's prepping for the LSAT knows, they're hard at first, but then you get used to them and you can improve. Kind of the same for logical reasoning. After I started to understand the types of questions and also the types of answers, I was able to improve. However, with reading comprehension, I actually found that the most difficult area to improve. And I found it was often very hit or miss. Like either I really understood a passage and enjoyed reading it, or I found a passage very boring, or I kind of zoned out during it. I guess it depends on where it fell during the actual test and the practice test. But I was wondering, in terms of kind of the next couple months, do you have any strategies for improving reading comprehension, or any, outside of practice tests, of course, any types of things I should be reading to kind of get myself used to that kind of material?
Yeah, sure. So there are nearly 400 released LSAT reading comp passages. So I don't recommend necessarily going beyond LSAT specific material. If you want to get better at reading comp, look at LSAT reading comp passages. You could use some of the older ones for untimed work or just to get more exposure. You could look to read them casually and then as a drill or as an exercise, simply extract the main idea. You could also play with ways to make the passages more interesting to you, even when they do seem boring. And so I recommend faking it till you make it in that approach. So in terms of like faking interest, finding ways to relate to the passage content. I also recommend exaggerating the different viewpoints in a given passage, kind of sensationalizing them or exaggerating the differences to better get a handle on what exactly they're talking about. You can put a simplified layer for yourself on top of what the passage is talking about, just to help you get through it and summarize it. It's not literally true, of course, but it can still be a useful way to get a handle on what they're talking about. So if you could think about it in terms, of course, so if you could think about ways to frame things in terms of liberal versus conservative, or old versus new, or objective versus subjective, those are some common differences you might see between different viewpoints expressed in a passage. That's the number one thing you can do to improve on reading comp. If you find certain passages boring, is just find ways to make them interesting to help you get through it, so that you're not just moving through the passage, yet not actually absorbing any of the information they're sharing, because then you're just wasting time. So you got to find ways to actually at least extract the main idea.
Right. Definitely.
And you have a good number of months to play with different approaches and see what is the best way for you to get engaged with reading comp. Reading comp is more personal than the other sections, but so that's why I recommend some experimentation.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's helpful also looking at it as, I don't necessarily just have to read them during a practice test, but even just reading them maybe throughout the day, or like just reading them in terms of getting used to focusing on the main idea and separating things, even if it's not a practice test, just getting used to reading the 400 past tests that they've posted, because I guess that is a ton of material. And if I use that accordingly, it's probably the best way to prep. That makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah. So I would look to read these to get through more of them, instead of reading whatever online news sites you might read or social media you might look at. So instead of reading a given article or a book chapter, just read this instead. Have it loaded up, ready to go, make it as easy as possible. You could even try to print out some of the passages if that is going to help you get through them better.
Great. And one quick, just logistical question for the LSAT past tests that they've released. Do they release them online? Like, are there online copies I could get, or can I only get hard copies?
There are online, actually. They have a website called LSAC's Law Hub.
Okay, perfect.
They have the majority of exams in the online digital format, which is exactly what they'll look like on test day. So it's Law Hub, LAWHUB, and it's a $99 a year subscription. I highly, highly recommend it. Get it now, because that's not only will it give you a lot of exams at the lowest possible price, but it will also help you get used to the look and feel that you'll experience on test day.
Okay, perfect. That's super helpful to know now. Also, if it's a yearly subscription and I'm doing this for 3 months, for the next 3 or 4 months, that's perfect. Okay, thanks. Great. I'm trying to think of other things. Yeah, I guess just in terms of what you recommend in terms of like tracking my own progress, what would a reasonable curve look like in terms of improving my test scores? Like, say I'm prepping for the April one, where would I want to be in like March, let's say, or like a month from now? Like, do you have an idea of what a realistic timeline would look like?
I would just ask yourself, rather than looking at the points that you're getting, look at measuring the work that you're putting in. So this is the concept of a lead indicator over a lag indicator. So look at what you're putting in. And inevitably, if you maximize what you put in without burning out, of course, then you will eventually maximize what you're getting out.
Right, of course.
So I actually have a tracker that you can use called the LSAT Mastery Dashboard. And it helps you track things like the number of questions you've completed, the number of practice tests you've taken, the number of classes you've attended, the number of videos that you've watched, the number of reading comp passages you've read through. So track those each week. And then you can, of course, look at what your practice test scores are looking like. It is important to focus on an outcome as well, but I would start by looking at maximizing what you're putting in.
Right, definitely. That's super helpful. And I think that's something I didn't do as much before. I was kind of just looking at the score of the test, but I wasn't really looking at like, what was I doing in between tests, or what was I, like what skills were what new skills was I learning, or what was I improving on? I was kind of just looking at the numbers, which at first they improved and then they kind of stagnated a bit, and then they improved a little bit. And then I think if I had a couple more months with the time I had, I could have done it, but now I have a lot more time. And also just being able to take off the 2 weeks before the exam, I think will really help, because that was something that I wasn't able to do last time. And I noticed that when I did start really, really studying and spending most of my free time doing it, of course, my scores would improve, but having the 2 weeks before, I think, is really helpful. Also, just to be as rested as possible. when I'm taking it, which is why I'm aiming for the April one. But this is all really helpful. Thanks. I just have a couple logistical questions for your services. Is it possible, because it's at a subscription, so would it just be right before the subscription renews if I wanted to upgrade to like the LSAT Supreme, let's say, or one of your different packages? Would I just do that right before the subscription renews? Is that how it works?
Yeah, just shoot me an email and I'll help you take care of it.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Okay, this is really helpful. I'll definitely go to the LSAC Law Hub site and get the practice test now. Totally makes sense what you're saying with the just using the tests that already exist. And if they have so many available for that price, it makes a lot of sense just to use that, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. Awesome. Any other questions? Anything else I could support you on?
No, this sounds good. I think I'm in a good place to start. I'm going to start getting into it and trying to do, practice questions every day and just see how my progress goes. But thanks so much.
Definitely. It was great to meet with you. And let me know if you need anything moving forward. I'm happy to help.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.